In the modern football game, when we think about black and white on a football field, we think about the officials, the referee, the umpire, the judges. But it hasn't always been that color that they've worn. Back in the day, they wore all white. We're going to talk about that aspect of football history with Timothy Brown of footballarchaeology.com right after this.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darin Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darin Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pigpen, your portal to positive football history, and welcome to another evening of spending with Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com. Tim, welcome back to the Pigpen.
Yeah, thank you, Darin. Look forward to chatting, and this is a night where we can say brown is the new white, or white is the new brown, or something like that.
Yeah,
Which
and
gets into the subject that people don't know about yet. But
and all stripes are off on this one. So
that's right.
Okay. So, but of course, we're talking about a tidbit that you wrote recently called "When Football Officials Wore White Shirts." Maybe you could tell us about that history.
Yeah, that was 2.5 years ago recently.
Oh boy, time flies.
So, so I mean, basically, that was a pretty quick article. It just showed an image of a game where it was actually kind of a fun picture because it was from the 1920s, and in the teens, 20s, and even early 30s, a lot of times officials wore white shirts and then white pants, sometimes just gray or whatever it was. But kind of the ideal thing was to wear a white shirt, and it was so that picture was one of the early ones where a team was wearing white shirts as well. So it kind of made and that became kind of a challenge because originally officials kind of wore whatever they had, mostly just kind of beat up dirtier suits because kind of everybody wore suits all the time. But they'd wear beat up suits because they were going to fall in the mud and whatever. So there wasn't really anything kind of official. And then it kind of evolved that a lot of the officials would wear their college letter sweaters because it kind of showed that they were knowledgeable, that they knew the game. And then oftentimes they were doing games that where they had played or whoever they were associated with was not participating. So if they represented or if they played at Purdue, they might do the Chicago and Michigan game, but they wouldn't do Purdue and Indiana, right? So there was quite a period really into the teens where a lot of officials, assuming they could still fit in them, would wear their college letter sweater. And even the coaches would do that. If you look at like the team pictures from that era, 1890s through the teens, if there's a coach in the picture, a lot of times he's wearing his college letter sweater, which is different than all the team that he's coaching. So
I think about images of like Fielding Yost. He's a perfect example of that. He was always wearing playing gear.
Yep.
So
so then what started happening though was that teams were starting to recognize the need to have contrasting colors. There's no rule that teams should wear contrasting colors, but teams kind of started doing it on their own. And one of the more innovative ways to do that was to wear white jerseys. Like Stanford was one of the early ones, and they're probably the most famous one, but Northwestern wore white jerseys pretty early on. But what would happen then is when the refs were wearing, or the officials were wearing white jerseys, then the players would get confused and they'd like out of the corner of their eye, they'd see a white flash and they try to lateral the ball, but it was an official rather than a teammate. So this guy named Lloyd Olds, who was a professor and longtime track coach at Eastern Michigan, he decided he needed to do something about that. So he went to the local sporting goods dealer in Ann Arbor and ordered a shirt, custom made, that had black and white vertical stripes. And so that was the origin of the officials' jersey. And, then that all became pretty regulated. And, I mean, there was no official rule saying that officials had to wear those things. But like the Big Ten finally said, okay, because he did this in like the 20s. Big Ten didn't adopt those until 1937, but they said, okay, every official is going to wear black and white striped shirt. And so at that time, there were a bunch of regional officiating associations. And so there were other parts of the country that adopted black and white shirts, but they weren't what we think of as the zebra shirt. So like there was the Southern Football Officials Association, which basically covered what's now the ACC and SEC, and then the Southern Conference. And they had a shirt that was like, it was basically a white shirt, black collar, and then one black stripe down the front along where the buttons would be. And then they went through 3 or 4 different versions. They switched it up a couple times. But it was like, like one thing that, they were trying to get officiating to be official, right? To be certified instead of just, whatever guy that they could grab off the street. So in order to do, one way to do that was to allow, if you were a member of the association and you'd gone through training and certified, then you could wear our shirt. And so that was, one way to kind of make sure everybody recognized the officials knew what they were talking about was to, I mean, they could still be blind as a bat, but at least they knew the rules, right? So, and then there was another one in, they kind of got rid of theirs. I think they went to like the zebra shirt, maybe the early 50s, late 40s. And then in the Southwest Conference sort of thing, it was mostly like Texas, but that was the Southwest Football Association or Officials Association. So both of them were SFOA. And SFOA still exists, but anyways, they like the guy who was the head of that organization at the time, he created a shirt that was like, it was white, and then it had like same kind of black stripe going down the buttons, but at about like where a collar would start, like on a polo shirt, then it went V'd out over the shoulders and then met again. So it's like a diamond, that stuck on top of the shirt.
Mhm.
And that they didn't get rid of that till like 67 or 68. So that they kept that for a long time. And it was basically until that guy retired, they kept that shirt. But I've in that particular tidbit, I've got some images of teams where you got when you had teams playing from different conferences, now you have like the officiating crew comes from a different conference, right? You got a Big Ten and Big 12 or whatever they're called nowadays. If they're playing, then you'll have a SEC officiating crew. But back then, you'd have whatever 2 conferences they were from, you'd have a mixed crew. And so, there's games where you got officials who are out on the field together, some wearing zebra shirts and some wearing the regional shirts. So, it's just kind of goofy looking. It's one of those things you can't even imagine it now, but it made sense, back in the day. So, anyways, that's kind of the gist of when officials had white shirts and then when they started having black and white shirts.
Yeah, it's amazing. Just in my like quarter of a century officiating, how much the uniform changed. When I started, we of course we had the black and white shirts that we had, they still wear today at the high school level. But white knickers I wore. I had stirrup socks, like the baseball socks, and that was the first thing to change is the socks they incorporated. So you had the black and white. It was almost like the 70s high top socks. They were all one piece hose, and then you had regular
Yeah.
white sock and below it. And then in the early 2000s, when they started introducing the black pants, I can remember some of my cohorts are like, "Well, that's so untraditional. You can't, it's white knickers are traditional." I said, "Well, actually," I said, "probably wearing a black dress slacks was probably before anytime before white knickers, if you go back and look at some photos. So I shared some photos that I had seen, with some of them. They're like, wow, I guess you're right. I said, so actually we're going back to the way it was, at least below the waist. But
Yeah.
yeah, so some interesting things. And of course, the NFL changing their stripes probably 20 some years ago to their more, I don't know what you call it, zigzag lightning bolt type stripes on some of the places.
Yeah.
That's kind of unique instead of the straight up. My some of my friends, of course, would bust them for me a little bit and say, there's only two people wear stripes, the blind and people that are inmates. Which one are you? And I guess you're both, or it's things like have those kind of comments like that too. But I said our stripes go the opposite way of the inmates. So,
Yeah. Well, it is it's an interesting thing just how the uniforms basically followed the path of officiating becoming, more professional, right? And all the training that was required in order to officiate. And, you know, because again, back in the day, it was like if you had played and you had been the captain of the local high school, then that was probably pretty good to officiate, local high school games and things. So, yeah, I mean, they always wanted somebody who was like they considered trustworthy and stuff. But yeah, I mean, the uniform is basically a way to just is a credential, right? I mean, it's like military stripes, and whatever, something that designates you as different.
yeah, they would. I know early on when I was fishing, they would take you through some basically some credence why you'd wear black and white, and it was for showing neutrality. You weren't partial to either the dark uniform or the light uniform. You were neutral, and that it set you apart from everybody else. And as uniform, I mean, it gets pretty anal out there. And maybe folks don't really appreciate me now. Everybody will look, but when you watch officiating crews, everybody has to either wear the short sleeve or the long sleeve. I mean, even high school on down. I mean, I guess little kids games you can show up, but there's sometimes where it was like the weather was like iffy. You don't know if it's like 60 degrees. Is it can be too chilly to wear short sleeves and maybe you want to wear long sleeves. So you'd have to pack your gear to
Huh,
have both. Take so everybody's going
I
out
never
on the
realized that.
field. Yeah, and there used to be a time when I first started fishing, you could wear jackets, the black and white striped jackets. I don't think they allow you to do that anymore, but that was really nice in the wintertime. You have a December game and you could put a striped jacket on. But if one person wore a jacket, everybody had to wear a jacket. So if you had one
Huh.
guy in your crew didn't have a jacket, tough luck. You're wearing long sleeves and suck it up. It's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
some
makes
little
sense.
little nuances. So you look uniform and everybody's the same except for one guy wearing a white hat. But yeah, that was the other thing that was kind of interesting. If you go back and watch NFL games from like the 70s, nowadays the referee wears a white hat, everybody else wears the black with white piping. But the NFL in the 70s, the referee was the one that wore the black with white piping, and all the other officials wore the white caps, and
Hmm.
just kind of a little backwards from what the college and high school were. And they changed that. I don't know, probably in the 80s. I think they changed to
Well,
the same
the
thing.
the AFL had the colored stripes, right?
Hmm. Yes. Yeah,
So
the fourth AFL, the one that we know as the AFL in the 60s.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I couldn't remember if the NFL had tried that at one point too or not, but
They
but I mean
may have.
they had like red. I think it was red stripes primarily, but
Hmm.
yeah,
The other thing that's kind of interesting when you see these officials wearing these white shirts back in this era that you're talking about the 20s especially. It's amazing how other sports their officials either football emulates what other sports are doing. So I almost think of like a
right,
boxing official wearing a white stripe with a bow tie, and you see some of that
yeah,
in football in that era. And nowadays football you think of with the stripes, but my son played lacrosse, which I wasn't familiar with till he was in high school and playing it. And they wore black and white stripes, black and white pipe hats, yellow flags. So some of the other sports said, "Hey, this works.
yeah.
We're going to do that too."
Well, I actually meant to mention that because the white stripe of or the white shirted official actually started in basketball. Now, it could
Oh,
have
did
started
it?
a track or something like that, but the mentions that I, saw from newspapers at the time was that started in basketball. And then, but you had a lot of the same people who officiated one sport officiated the other.
Mhm.
They just carried their gear over and, applied it. So
Yeah. So
anyway,
okay. So the football start the black and white stripes, and that's how basketball and lacrosse pick up on them, or is that
yeah,
basketball?
football started that first. I mean,
Okay.
even like, Lloyd Olds, who the inventor of the zebra shirt, he officiated basketball too. And because he was doing it at the time, he was doing it at a high school level for the most part. And then he would, later on he worked, kind of what we'd now think of as G4 level games.
Hmm.
So he was doing college and high school, but he started wearing those shirts. Uh, the story is that he started against when a team from Arizona came up and wore white shirts, but I've looked and looked. I've never found any Arizona team playing up in Michigan. So I think, whenever he got quoted saying that, he just mixed up, you know, could have been a team from Ohio or Arkansas or whatever, but it wasn't Arizona.
Right. Yeah, that would be kind of rare for them to want to come from the desert up to the cold
Yeah.
climate of Michigan. Very cool. But hey, this great story, Tim, and great history is something we sort of take for granted that how the officials are dressed and don't get to appreciate what other eras did with their officiating and football in general. And you cover this quite a bit in your tidbits and almost on a daily basis. And maybe you could share with the listeners how they can enjoy and partake in some of your tidbits.
Yeah, I would just put a plug for the search function. So, you can find this stuff on footballarchaeology.com, but up in the upper right hand corner, there's a little search function. So if you just put in like officials uniforms, it'll pull up like 3 or 4 articles I've written, and mostly the ones that I've referenced. But like we've talked about these different uniforms, and it would help just to see them. So if you're listening and you think about it, go to the site, search for the search for them. But so anyways, it's on footballarchaeology.com. You can subscribe to, you'll get the email, every time I publish an article. You can choose to turn off the email and just, get it in your Substack feed, or just bookmark it, whatever it is, however it works for you. And then you can follow me on Blue Sky. Well,
Well, Tim Brown, we thank you once again for joining us here on these Tuesday evenings and getting to talk about football history. And we'd love to talk to you again next week.
very good. Look forward to it.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.